quite often ask us about, which is using the data that Donman creates in Excel. So what I'm going to do first is show you some of the many ways that Don will actually create the data, and then Murray will go through and show you actually using that data in Excel and what you can do with it. Okay. So when I'm on the main screen, there are common ways that people know that data gets created, like when you process your donations and you create your mail merge data file. You go through donor appeals and create a selection file, and then create your mail merge data file again. So these are very common ways that the data is created. The create mail merge data file on this one here is very similar to the preceding one, but it means that once I've created my selection file, I can go through create mail merge data file, choose my selection file here, whatever it may be. By default, the system will count how many records are in my file, and as I go through, by default, the system will put a file name called appeal.txt, but I can just rename the file down there, especially if I'm using it for a mailing. If I know that my selection file up the top here and my actual disk file are called the same name, then I know where it originated from. Okay, so if I say yes, overwrite in this case, I don't want to load word and merge. The fields that you see on the second screen above the dotted line will come out no matter what you do. Okay, so they are the core fields of doing a mailing. Other fields that have been added down the bottom here, by going down to donors, and then choosing the appropriate field that you want to also have in your output. Okay, in this case, I'm just going to leave it as is, then continue. So it will then create that text file in normally the DM work directory, but if you're running in a multi-company, it'll be in your working folder. So, you may be working in a departmental file or a multi-company file or something like that. So the folder will have its own name as such, and you can look into that folder there. There are other ways that people create data, or the system creates data, that people may not be aware of. So what we're going to concentrate more on is those, because I think the common ones, the appeals and processing, stuff people do know about. Yeah. So one of the common ways that Donman will create data for me is if I go through reports, and most of the common reports that we run, like in this case, if I go to campaign reports, periodic campaign results, down the bottom of the screen, it'll show me that based on whatever I choose for my report, a tab-delimited text file called campbd.txt will be created to import into our programs. Okay. So what this actually means is that if I go and have a look, in my Donman drive, in this case it's on my S drive, DM work being my working folder, and in there I'll have a folder called report_text. So any of the reports that create data will automatically put it into this particular folder. So at the moment I'll leave that open, go back to Donman. So if I said look from 01/14 to 31/12/14. Okay, so whatever date range you wanted to do the report for, you can, as you would do normally, choose by campaigns or groups, ledger codes. You can then choose grand total or subtotal. So in this case, if I say subtotal only and print preview, and so it's going through the transactions and showing me how many it's picked up. But the details, as I see them on the screen now, will also be in my folder. So if I go back to my folder now, go into my report text, in this case I've got them sorted by date modified, and you can see I've got the campbd.txt file there, which is what the program was showing me it's going to create. If I open that up, you can see it's exactly the same details as was on the report. So if you run a subtotal report or you run a full report by saying no to subtotal and grand total, that will be the result that you see in the file. The file itself, you can see, looks just like any other data, and each of the columns, there's campaign, group, description, subtotal, etc. Each of those has a tab in between, which makes it very easy then to import into Excel. Okay, so if I close that, if I were to run the report again, go through, and then in this case they know I want a full listing, so I want to know who the donor was, what date they gave, everything about it. Again, I can go through, do print preview. It'll run through, extract the data again. Okay, so now my report is a full report showing all of the transactions in the date range that I've selected, how much the person gave, the receipt number, the donor number, the date, etc. So again, if I then went back to here, my camp ID is still there, but now you can see it's exactly what was in the full listing. So you'll run it one way or the other, and it will just overwrite the file. There's no prompt, it will just blindly do it. So you can see there are quite a few text files in this folder, and they all come from different reports. The format is very similar, depending on the actual report. So you can just go through, run the report, any of them that you run. The same if I say go back and say let's do a ledger report, and ledger breakdown report, the same sort of thing. Down here it's got tab delimited text file, will be called ledgerrpt.txt. Okay, so all of the reports will show you. Some of them actually show you the folder that it will create the actual text file into, but most of them just have the file name itself like this. So as soon as you look in your working folder, look for the report_text folder. That's where all the text files will be. So if you want to do something else with that text file, put it into Excel and then do a chart from it or whatever you actually want to do with it, all of those text files will be there. So they're sort of from most of the standard reports that you use. One of the other reports that people quite often run is just to get a look of donors based on a selection file. So if I go into donor appeals and run the short summary of donor info, again, this one's actually showing me a text file be created in the report_text and donlist.txt. So this one's actually showing me the folder as well. How this report sort of works is if I choose a selection file and enter, I then have an option that says instead of printing a donor's donation total, which is their total since they first gave, I can output a total in a period of time. So this is fairly useful when you're trying to, find current donors or lapsed donors or something like that, or just people that are given a certain dollar amount in a period of time. If I say yes there and enter, I can then put in my date range till today, and from there I can then exclude donations by the above by campaign or group, or include any donations. So that will really depend on what your selection criteria was in the first place as to what you choose here to show. In this case, I just want to show the history since the 1st of 2012 till today. If I want to put a title or a heading on the report, I can type that in here. But in this case, I'll just enter through. I don't need addresses, and print preview. So this will come up, will show me the donor ID, the name or the company name based on the donor type, the number of donations given in the period, and the total dollars that the person had given in the period. What I can also see is, if I look across, is I'll always see the last donation the donor gave, no matter what time period I have chosen here, and the date they last gave. So this is a very quick way if I were, doing a report on current donors or lapsed donors by date of last gift. I can quickly validate the data by just looking at that last column there to make sure that these records did suit my criteria. And again, the format of that will be in the text file in the report_text folder that you can open up if you wanted to put into Excel or, create a spreadsheet, send it to somebody else or whatever you want to do with that. Yeah. So you will find quite a few of the standard reports have that option that will create the text file in the background. If it has got that option, it'll always be down the bottom to show you on the screen when you're running the report what the name of the text file will be. The other way, of course, we can create data is by using the report writer. If I go into Reporter, Visual Reporter. So I can then either use a saved report, so if I did File, Open Report Format, and I've got some saved reports here, okay, so I can open any of those reports. Or I can just create a new one. In this case, if I said, look, I'm going to go through and look at donations, and I then want to sort it based on the donation date and the campaign code. From there, I can add my criteria. Donation date, greater than or equal. Okay, so I'll use a date similar to what I was using before. If that was my only criteria, down the bottom of the screen, I can now choose the fields that I actually want to show in the report. So if I said, well, first thing I want to show is the donor number, and then I want the name. So in order to do that, up the top here, I can go back to donors. So now I want the surname, first name. Okay, so every field that's in the donor record is available as well. Then the company, and now I can go back to the donation file and extract the details of the actual individual transaction. So I can show how much the person gave, what campaign, what date it was, what ledger code, and a receipt number. Yeah, so depending again on what you want to show in the report, you've got options for all the fields. You've got the entry date, the batch, how they paid it. Any of those fields can be moved across, and then we can preview the data. So I'm now getting a report with more details than I was getting previously because I've now sort of geared it towards what I want to show. From there, I can either just save the report format or print it, or if I go up the top and do File, Save Report Data, I then have a couple of options. So I can do it as a text file, which of course I can import into Excel, or I can create it as an Excel XML file. So in this case, I'll do one of both, and the way you open them, one will open up more natively because it's already in an Excel sort of format. But if I create one as text, it'll be very similar to the other reports where I go through Excel, will by default start the text import wizard, and from there I say, it's data and it's tab delimited, and import that. There are some fields that we have to be a little bit careful when we put into Excel, and Murray will explain those as we go through. But just as an example, the one here where I've got chart account code or ledger code is 4-1600, but Excel will most likely see that as 4-1600. So sometimes Excel does maths on things that you really don't want it to, and Murray will show you when you import the data how to actually keep that as a text-only column so that it doesn't get changed. Okay, there's quite a few fields that we need to be careful of when we do that. So if we go back up where we were, save report data as text. If I've got a report that I've opened that's already got a name, in this case it's a new report, so as such no title, I can then put any file name at all. If I had the report saved, I'll just call it test 2012 donations. So now the report actually has a name up the top. If I go to save report data as text, you can see it's now showing me that it's going to create it into the working folder that I've got, and the name of the text file will match the name of the report. Okay, so wherever your actual report is saved, the data will also be saved. So if you've got different areas of the business that you want to have their own reports, yeah, you can save the report file itself into that folder, and whenever you run it and extract data, then you can utilize that folder structure to say, well, I now know that the text files are sort of in the same place. They're not sort of all going into DM work. If we just click on OK, so this will now process through my donation file and create the actual test 2012 donations with exactly the same details as I've got on the report here. Okay, so that's using VisRep to sort of do a report for that sort of thing. Any of the fields that you've got, on the donor record or the donation, you can use donation type, donor type, anything at all, you can then include in your report, and you can then do different things with those as you go through Excel. One of the other reports that is in the system that doesn't get used a whole lot by people is this table report generator. So the table report generator allows me to choose one of the data files in Donman and then any two fields in that file to do sort of a cross-reference report. So if I go in and generate a table report, if I've been through this process before, I could have a save report that I can then say yes and enter the format name here. For this one, I'm going to say no, I'm doing a new one. And from there it says which file do you want to report on. So by default it's on donors, but again you can choose the donation file, campaign, sort of any of these reports. In this case I'll choose the donation file. If I wanted to do it based on a selection of people, I could do that, but I can also add a filter. So if I added a filter, it says yes. Just like in the report, I've got access to all of the fields that are part of the actual donation record. Okay. So in this case, I might say I'm just looking for something that banks must be equal to Y. And so you can do it sort of filtering on that. If I said, no, I don't really want to do that, I'm just want to select two fields and actually get that sort of table look of that, I can just cancel that one and go straight down here and say, now I just want to select an item to go across the page. With a table report, it's, unless you're putting it into Excel and you're quite happy to go across, multiple columns, it's normally much easier to read a couple of pages down than it is a couple of pages across. So when you're choosing the fields, try and choose the field that you know has the least number of values to go across the page and the other field that you want to break down to go down the page. So as an example, if I chose the sex field, okay, or even the state, I know that it's going to have a limited number of, sorry, sex is in the donor record, but I know that there's only going to be a limited number of things, whereas if I chose something like receipt number, that would be horrendous number, okay, or pay method. So I know that there's a limited number of pay methods as we go through. So depending on what I wanted to do, if I went down and said, okay, I just want to get an idea based on when I put the donations through, what the date range was. So I then might use either the donation date here or the entry date. So the donation date is the date you put on the actual transaction screen when you're entering the donation. The entry date is the date it's updated by the actual system. So it's the day you actually do the processing itself. If I were to choose, in this case, donation date, I then get the option that says, do you want to group into month or year ranges? So if I said, yes, I do, I want to group into months. I can then put in the date range. If I wanted the year-by-year breakdown, at the top here, I say, I just want to choose the year. So if I said 01, okay, so I can put that in. Because I haven't covered every date range in the system, I've now got an option down the bottom that says, do you want to create a blank or other column? So in this case, I'll say no. And now I can choose a field to go down the page. So then I might say, well, what do I want to look at? So I might look at campaign or any of those things, or I might look at amount. If I chose, because campaign I can do very easily with my campaign report, but if I were choosing, say, an amount, I then get options down here to say, do I want to, group the columns by fixed amounts? So if I said yes, and I said I want to group them into amounts of 100. Yeah. From there, I can set up my own ranges, but for this one, I'll say, no, look, that's good enough. I'm going to leave it as that. So as I enter through, I then get an option to say, do you want a special item included in the report? So you can say yes, choose, a different field to include. So in this case, if I choose the amount, you can have percentage figures. You can also then, at this point, save the file as basically it says as an ASCII file, which is just a plain text format, but it is now going to be in the rows and column, format that an Excel file would be. If I said yes, Okay, so if I put the name of my text file in, then go through and run that one. So the table report just gives you a way to look at the data a little bit differently. And so you can now see that I've got my date ranges across the top, and I've got my amounts going down. If I had known that my amounts would be, because I've now grouped them based on the ranges that I did, that I could have said, no, I want amount to go across and then the dates to go down, because that would have made my report a little bit easier, because now I've sort of gone across. But because it's created a text file of that output, that will just open up just like a normal spreadsheet anyway, and I'll have all of the details. Okay? So that's just a way that you can use the table report to also sort of create your data and go through and say, well, that's what I want. That one by default, I exit the program. Yes. Okay. So that one by default will also go into your DM work directory. Yeah, so if I were to go here, DM work, sort by date modified. Okay, so now I've got my test table report. Okay, so again, you can see it's sort of got that same format like the data files that we looked at earlier, where I've got my rows over here, and I've got all my columns based on what I said, and at each interesting point, I can see how many records were in that dollar range. So in my date range, I can see how many records are in the dollar range. So you can also use the table report to create the data to go through. But they're the most common ways that, you'll sort of go through and say, well, how can I create data? Of course, you can do like pledge files, you can do like reminder letters, your appeals, you can do anything from a selection file, even donation processing, etc. as you go through. The difference with the processing reports is they are sort of automatically backed up by the system, and they're not automatically always generated to a text file. So because they are more geared around being a printed report, so we've got a page trail of what we've done. But hopefully that'll sort of show people a number of ways that you can sort of go through and create data from Donman that you may not have known about. The common ways, of course, the appeals and processing and stuff, but also that some of the reports create that output. You can utilize that output for whatever you want. As I said, the most normal way is Excel, and Murray will show you some of the tricks that, or things that might trip you up with putting data into Excel. I think he will.
Well, when I get control. Thanks, Gary, for that. As you can see from what he said, there are quite a large number of different ways of exporting the data from Donman. And I'll be having a look at how to import that data into Excel, some of the things that can trip you up when you do that, and also once you've got it into Excel, some of the basic things that you can actually do with that, some of the sorting, filtering, and pivot tables, and that type of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Excel, and we're going to open up, first of all, we're going to have a look at a file, appeal.txt. Now that's just the default name that you would get if you create a merged data file using a selection file. That all happens in the donor appeals menu. Gary mentioned that very briefly. So I've got a file called appeal.txt. I've actually been looking at it recently, so I can actually select it from here, or I can just simply go straight to my folder, Webinar DM Work, and now by default it's going to look for Excel files. Now we don't create Excel files, we create text files. So what I need to do is one of two things. I can either type the full name in here, or I can change the list here to look for either all files up the top, in which case I get every single file, of which there will be many, or I can look at text files. So long as your file ends in a .txt, .csv, or .prn, this will then show it in the list. And so I'm looking for appeal.txt, and here it is. So when I double click on that, it's brought up this thing called the text import wizard. Now, generally speaking, you can probably just go finish if you've created a tab delimited file, but not always. Now, I'm going to go finish here because it's going to show you some of the problems that you can have when you're doing this. Now, I'll come to these in a little bit more detail later, but some of the things that you've got to watch out for are things like if you output a barcode, you can see that it's come up with this really strange number, 1.3 something e to the 36. The barcode itself will be a long string of digits, basically zeros, ones, twos, and threes, and there'll be like 20 or more characters. Now I can reformat this to show a little bit more detail. So I'm just going to call it a number field with no decimal places. But you'll see that it's actually lost all of the remaining digits. It's lost significant digits at the end there, so you would not be able to use this as a barcode because clearly the barcode would be wrong. They all end in all of that string of zeros. So later on I'll show you how to overcome that. The other sorts of things that can happen too is if we look at some phone numbers. Here we've got some phone numbers. If I just expand that, you can see this one here, it's just got 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This one here is come out okay. Now the difference is in the original data in Donman, this second one would have been put exactly like that with a 0, 3 space and then the digits. Because there are spaces there, Excel is able to recognize that that's not actually a number to be treated like a normal number. It's imported that specially as text. So because of spaces, it imports correctly. However, the one above it and the one below it, in Donman, they would have had 0, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 without any spaces. So when Excel tries to import that, it thinks that that's just a straight number. Numbers don't start with leading zeros, so it strips the leading zero off and just puts in that number as a number itself. So when you're looking at that as a phone number, it's obviously not correct. So we'll have a bit more of a look at that in a short while. But essentially, that's the way that you can import your data. So if all of your phone numbers are correct with spaces in them, you won't have that problem. If you're not outputting the barcode, you won't have a problem with that. Most of the other data that you're likely to get is probably going to be recognized okay. If it's say currency type things like the total amount that they've given or number of donations, there won't be any problems. A lot of the other fields are text fields, which it'll be able to import correctly. A little bit later on, I'll show you some data that was imported from donation files, and there would be a couple of the account codes, the chart of account or ledger codes, that have actually been imported, and it's interpreted them as dates. So again, there are some other types of fields that you have to be careful of. Now, the other way of doing this is if we actually go into our directory, and I'm just going to look for appeal.txt. Okay, there is appeal.txt. Now, you may not necessarily see the .txt. That's just a matter of whether you've set your Windows up to show you the full name, including the suffix at the end, or whether that's defaulted to not showing it. But in this case, it's a text file that's telling us that at the end. If I double-click on that, oh, actually, that's, where am I? I'm in the wrong directory, I apologize. Let me get out of there and go into the webinar. Sorry about that. So just again looking for appeal.txt. When I double click on it, it's brought up the data. Now I'm not using Notepad as my default text editor. I've got a different one, and in this case you can actually see these little orange arrows. They represent tab characters. So all of the data between each of the columns is separated by a tab. So you've got title, then a tab, then first name, then a tab, surname, etc. Here, where you've got John Smith and then there's 3 tabs, it's simply because there's no data to show for, I guess in this case, post-nominals, position, and then it comes up to the company field. The alternate way of importing this into Excel is to actually highlight everything, and I'm just going to do that by typing Control-A for all. I do Control-C to copy, and then if I go into a blank spreadsheet, so let me close that down, and create a new spreadsheet, if I just simply do a paste there, you can see that that data has come in again, pretty much the same way that it looked before. And again, we've still got those same problems that we have with the barcode and with the phone numbers. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to import that, tell Excel what to do or how to treat those particular fields rather than doing them as a general import. So again, I'll just close that down without saving. So I'm just going to go in the normal way that I explained first of all. So I'm going to open a file, and because I've just opened it recently, I've got it here. So I just click on there, and it's come up with the text import wizard. Now, by default, anything that's produced in Donman will typically be either comma delimited or tab delimited. There would be the odd thing that's not like that, like some of the files, the ABA files that you send to the banks, but anything that you've typically generated using those things that Gary has mentioned would be delimited in some way, either comma or tab. So we can go to the next option, and by default that's tab. Now most of the files that we produced, the ones that Gary showed, typically would be tab delimited, but occasionally some of them would be comma. If you look down the bottom, you can see that by using tab, it's already been able to split those up nicely into the columns. If I take that off and put comma, you can see it's not split that up. So I'll go back to tab, which is the default. Everything's fine at this point. I can then go next, and it now allows me to pick any particular column, and up the top here I can tell it how to import it. Now by default, most things will come in as general, which means it will try and interpret whichever way it thinks is best. Now I know that my barcode, if I scroll across to my barcode field, which is a bit further across, here it is. So here you can see the original data, and you can see that it doesn't end in all zeros. In order to import that correctly, what I do is I highlight that, and then I tell it to import it as text. So what that means is it's simply going to bring it in exactly as it is in the text file. It will not try and interpret that as a number. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing for my phone number. So here I've got the phone work, and so I'll say I want to bring that in as text, and I'll do the same thing for phone home, and the mobile number. So again, in the case of this mobile, this first number here, it would actually have dropped the leading 0 had I not changed it to text. There are some fields that you can tell it to import as text, and you can tell it the format of that data, or if there's a field in there that you don't really want, you can actually highlight it and say, do not import the column, but generally it's easier just to import it and then delete that column. So having gone through that, the last thing is to go finish. And now, if I scroll across, when I look at my barcode over here, you can see it's brought in all of the digits, and then when I'm doing my merge, I can actually format that as a barcode. I mean, I can do it here as well. I can just change here. If you use the data tools, I can use 4-state barcode, and I can make that probably about 20 points. And there you can see I've got my barcode in there. And if I go across and look at my phone numbers, you can see that it's actually brought those full phone numbers in, including the leading 0. So those sorts of fields, either the length of a number field like the barcode, or things like leading zeros, they're the typical things that you're going to have trouble with. And so if you do the import and then you find that it's not correct, then you can simply close the file, do the import again, but then go to those columns in the text import wizard in the second step and tell it to import it normally as text or as however it is meant to be imported. Okay, so sometimes, as I mentioned, the dates or other fields will be interpreted as dates. A little bit later, we'll be having a look at a file which has got dates in it, and has got ledger codes that have been interpreted as dates, and we'll go through the same procedure, but this time we'll set it to import it as text so that it doesn't try and interpret it as a date. Okay, now sometimes you're going to get files possibly from Donman, but more likely from external sources. Somebody want a mailing bureau, or perhaps some other company that you deal with. You might have sent them some data. They send something back to you. It might come in as a CSV file. Now, if I go to my file here, let me just close this so we don't get too confused. So if I now go back to my directory, I've got a file in here somewhere. This one here, mytext.csv. Now I can right-click and open that with my editor, and this is what the data actually looks like. So instead of being separated by tabs, it's separated by commas. Now, if I just close that here, don't need that, don't need that. So if I just double-click on this, by default, Windows is going to try and open it in Excel. And that's fine for a lot of things, but again, where you have some problems, like with phone numbers, you can see again here, it's dropped the leading zeros. Here, we've got the mobile number, again, no leading zeros. Now, you can't easily do it from the actual menus, like from here, we've got the file. It's not easy to import that file into Excel. So what you need to do is you go into Excel, and then you go File, Open. Oh, sorry. No, before I do that, what we have to do is we have to change it to a text file, because even if I try and open it in Excel, it will just import it straight like it did when I double-clicked it. So what I need to do is I actually need to change that to a text file. So I'm just going to change the file name to .txt. It's given me a warning saying because I'm changing the file type that certain things might be unusable because of that, but that's fine. Having now changed it in Excel, I can go through the same process that I did before. So I can go Open, navigate to my DM work directory. Again, I've changed the file type to text files, and here's my file, mytext.txt. Now here we can see down the bottom, it's higgledy-piggledy, but it is delimited. So it's just when we get to here, we need to make it delimited. And again, you can see how it's now able to interpret that in those nice columns. If I go next here, I can then again go across. Now, I'm going to go to the phone and import that as text, general, text again, so it tells you how it's doing it, and then with the phone mobile, I'm going to do the same thing. Now, all right, so if I now go finish, there it is, and these phone numbers here have now come in exactly as they were in my file originally. So if you do have a CSV file, rename it to .txt, and then go through the file, the text import wizard, and specify that it's a comma delimited file, and then nominate those columns that you need to import specially. If all of the columns are straight standard text, then you can just open it as a CSV any way that you like. All right, so once we've actually got our data into Excel, there are a number of things that we can do with it. And sometimes in Donman, using any of our reports, there may not necessarily be ways to actually come up with the data or the report that you want. For instance, you might want to know what the highest donation that a person has given in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, of course, you can do a selection, or you can output their highest ever amount, and you can find out when that date was. But if that date was 10 years ago, then you won't know what their highest donation is in the last 3 years. So quite often under those circumstances, what you need to do is output all of their donations, everybody's donations for the last 3 years, import them into Excel and do some manipulation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to open another file that I've got with some data. It's not quite for the same sort of thing that I mentioned there, but it'll at least show you the sort of thing that can be done. So I'm just going to go Open. The file is this one here, recent donations over $100. So if I just go Finish here, if I look at this chart of account code, you'll see that most of the charts of account codes have come through okay because they're just text. However, some of these ones here, this one has come out as April 70. That's line 7 or row 7. What I'm going to do is I'll close it and re-import it. And this time I'll tell it to treat the column as a text fault column. So again, I go next, and and it's already nicely aligned. I go next again, and here I'm going to import that as text and then finish. So now if I look at row 7, you can see that 4-2070, it thinks 2070 is a year way into the future, and the 4 represents the month of April. And in fact, it interpreted 4-3010 as a date as well. So that's another one to look out for. Now in this case, I've got a number of donations. I'm not sure what date or what order it is, possibly date order, not really sure. One of the things that you might want to do is sort that so that you've got all of the donations for a particular donor together, and then perhaps maybe from their highest to the lowest. So to do that, what I need to do is, I usually will, although you don't necessarily have to do that, if you go to data, you can click on sort, and it's going to ask what you want to sort by. Now, it's been able to work out that the first row is actually headers, but sometimes it's not smart enough to do that, in which case, if it is headers, you can just simply tick this where it says my data has headers, and then it won't try and sort that amongst all the data. It will leave those at the top. So in my case, what I want to do is I want to sort that by, first of all, by donor number, and from smallest to largest, that doesn't really matter. If I do that just like that, it's done the sort, so all the donor number for 207 are together, but the actual rest of the data within donor 207, don't know what order it is. We don't know. We can't necessarily tell by looking at it. However, if I go to sort again, I can add another level to that and say within each of those donor numbers, I want to sort by amount, maybe from largest to smallest. And when I do that, now we know that their first ever donation that shows here will always be their highest. Now the data that I've got is kind of fictitious, and so in most cases you've got the same amount multiple times for each donor, but perhaps if we look a bit harder, we might find something that's not the case. So for 704, we've got 7,000 twice, then we've got 4,950 and then 4,400. So if you actually want to find out, well, that's all well and good, but I want to find out what their highest is. I don't care about the rest. Then again, still in the data tab, you can click on remove duplicates. And when we do that, we can nominate how we think of a record as being a duplicate. Now, in this case, it says if all of these things are the same, you will then get rid of any duplicates where they're all the same. But if I unselect all and just select donor number, then what that means is that any record there where it's got the same donor number as the next one, they will then be treated as duplicates. Now, because of the order that I've sorted it, if I delete the duplicates, it will only keep the first one, and we know from the way that I've sorted those that the first one is always going to be the highest one for each of those donors. So by going OK to that, it's telling me it's deleting 121 duplicate records, and now there is only one record for each one. And if I have a look at 704 that we looked at before, you can see that it was $7,000. So it's got rid of the other 3 donations that were either the same or lower. So that's just an easy way of getting rid of a lot of duplicate data. There would not be an easy way of doing that in Donman using Reporter or any of those other reports, because this is probably the best or only way to do it, by doing it in Excel. Now, I've output some data in this case, not only from the donation record, so we took donor number, the amount, the campaign, the donation date, the account code. Those first 5 columns all came from the donation record, but the last 2, the donor source and the donor type, they have actually come from the donor record that's associated with that donation record. So what I can do here is I can do some things called filtering. So if I click on the filter button, I need to probably highlight all the rows I want to filter on, which could be all of them. And so you've now got this little drop-down button here. So if you only wanted to look at, say, donor type of I can say select all, get rid of the tick there, and just maybe pick I. Maybe I also want C for corporate. And if I go enter on that, then you can see that I'm only getting records for donor type of I or C. And again, for source code, I can say, yeah, look, I only want app, maybe those ones, and then that's all you'll get. So you can filter by multiple rows. You've got the little sort of symbol next to it, the filter symbol, a small version of that. So you can see that for those 2 rows that I'm actually doing filtering, if I wanted to say, look, I want all my donor types, I can just put a tick there, and then we get all of those. And to go back to all the source codes, I can do that as well. All right, now we can also do something called filtering. So what I might do, subtotal reports. So I'm actually going to go back to my original file where, oops, where am I going? I'm just undoing all of this to go back. Okay, so we're back to where we were at one stage. Okay, I can do a subtotal by going still on the data tab. I can go subtotal, and it says for each change in donor number, so this is going to give me total by donor number. So I can say, what do I want to do? Do I want to count the records? No, I actually want to sum them, and add the subtotal to amount. So when I go OK, it does a little bit of adding up, and then so for donor number 207, you can see that the total amount is $442. Same for 255, 285, it's just, sorry, for 371, it's just 285. So you've got a record of that. Now, at this stage, we can actually go back to level 3. So this is level 2. If I go back to level 3, or do I want to go to level 1? Level 1 just shows you the overall amount. If I go to level 2, it now just shows me the total for each of those donors. Let's say I wanted to look at this one, say $23,000 for donor 704. I can just click on the plus for that, and it just shows me the details for that particular donor. So that's just a very basic overview of the subtotal report, but again, it can be quite useful under certain circumstances just to produce the report that you want. If I go back again, okay, that's as far back as I can go. The last thing I'm going to show you is the pivot table, because the pivot table is a very nice way of very quickly sort of processing your data into a very nice table. Gary showed you how to do a table report in Donman. Well, we can do the same sort of thing in Excel, but it's actually a lot easier to do, and you can sort of cut and paste or cut and change it as you go till you get the result that you're after. So I'm just going to highlight all the columns I'm interested in, which in this case is all of them. I go to the Insert tab, and I say Insert Pivot Table. Because I've highlighted them, it's already picked the data that I want to use. This will create a new worksheet. So at the moment, I've just got the one worksheet down the bottom called Recent Donations Over $100, because that was the text file name. But I'm going to create a new worksheet, and I go OK. So here you can see I'm in sheet 1. This is where my pivot table is going to build, and this over here is how I build it. Now, I can start off by sticking in amount down here, and by default it's given me a count of amount, and you can see that down in the bottom corner here. I'd prefer to get the total amount, so from here I can click on the drop down, select value field settings, and instead of choosing count, I can choose sum, and there I get the total overall for my data that I've got there. That's pretty easy to have done normally in a spreadsheet. Let me say I want to know a breakdown of that by source code. So I can drag source code down to row labels, and now you can see down here a list of all the source codes that was included in the data that I gave, and now you see the total amount for each of those, followed by the overall total. So again, that would be fairly simple to do without doing it. You could do that as a subtotal report. However, if I want to now get a breakdown of that by campaign code across the top, I can drag campaign code to the column totals, and now what I'm seeing across here are the actual campaigns, and for each cell, like for, well, let me use general. So for general, you can see, well, the question mark is there because there's been some data that's come from archived records, so we don't know what the actual campaign was. So if I ignore that, I can go to 200 people that gave to general. Their source code is app. For grants, there were $125,000 that came from source code people of app into that campaign. And again, we've got the totals now for each of the source codes. If I look at that and go, yeah, I don't want source code, I can drag source code out perhaps and say I want that by donation date. So what we're seeing now is every single donation date in the period of data that I extracted, and I can see what campaign it came from. Now, you probably don't really want to see it just on every single date. So I've got 2 years worth of data here, and this is just donations over $100. What I can do is I can click on that and say group, and by default it's going to group it by month. So when I do that and go back up to it, you've now got January, February, March, etc. Now that in fact is both years, because any donation that was January 14 or January 15 would now appear in here. So what I can do is I can click on it and go group again, and as well as grouping by month, I can group by year. So now I've got 2014 with each of the months, and I've got 2015 up until when the data stopped in October for each of those things. So there's a lot that you can do there. Now at this stage we've only got one thing across the top and one thing essentially down the bottom. What I might do, I might get rid of the donation date again and the years, and let me put something like maybe donor type down here. Okay, so you might say, yeah, but within donor type I'd like a breakdown by the source code. Well, I can drag donor source down as well, and now say for donor type of C, you've got all the different source codes for donors that made donation in that period, and you've now got that actual breakdown. We could do similar things across the top and have breakdowns within bequest. Maybe we could put chart of account in there as well. And so now for something like, let's have a look at a good one. If we can find something there. Most of them aren't showing much. No. So in this case, most of these campaigns have purely gone into the one account code. So there wasn't any of that breakdown like we saw over here. You can, if you want, also find out how many donations. When we first set this up and we copied amount down into here, it gave the counts. Well, I've copied that in there now. So for each of these cells where we had just the one cell before, we've now got two. So we've got the sum and we've got the amount as well, the count as well. So 2 donations for $220,000. All right. There is a lot more that you can do with these pivot tables. There was a complete seminar going for about 45 or 50 minutes that I did back in September 2012. And so if you go back to our previous recorded webinars, you will see that one back in September 2012, and that goes into a lot more detail, goes into a little bit about creating some of the data in Donman, but then how to do some of the nice little tricks you can actually do with pivot table. So at this stage, we're going to conclude our webinar. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy that.